She was already pulling radishes when the spreadsheet caught my attention. 6 beds. Not 6 acres, 6 beds. Each one no wider than a doorframe, no longer than a driveway. And pinned above her potting bench, a calendar so marked up with colored ink, it looked like air traffic control for vegetables. Every square on that calendar had a crop name, a plant date, and a harvest date, every single one. 12 months. No gaps. Her name was irrelevant. What mattered was the number at the bottom of her ledger. 17 months of consecutive monthly harvests. Not one month missed, grossing between $900 and $2,000 every 30 days, from a space most people would use to park 3 cars. The farmers making the most consistent income in this country aren't chasing one big payday. They're running a loop. And the math behind that loop, once you see it, changes the way you look at every bare patch of soil on your property. The way a well-made tool feels different from a cheap one before you've even used it. That's what this system does to your thinking. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how a 6-bed rotation generates revenue every month of the year, why indoor growing isn't optional but structural, and why the most profitable farming model in recorded history was erased from American agricultural education for reasons that had nothing to do with whether it worked. Years before anyone in Washington had an opinion about how Americans should farm, a civilization was feeding 200,000 people from a lake. Not beside a lake, from it. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan sat on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, in the valley that is now Mexico City. The land was swamp. Conventional farming, the kind that requires dry, flat, open ground, was not an option. So they built their own land. They wove reeds between wooden stakes driven into the shallow lake bed, layered mud, and decomposing vegetation on top until the surface rose above the waterline, and planted. These were chinampas. Rectangular plots, roughly 100 feet long and 8 feet wide. Canals ran between them. The water never stopped irrigating. The composting lake bottom sediment never stopped feeding the soil. Here is the part that matters. Each chinampa didn't produce 1 harvest per year. It produced up to 7. Corn followed beans, followed squash, followed flowers. When one crop came out, the next went in. Sometimes the same week. Specialists managed the rotation. They tracked which seeds performed best, which sequences rebuilt the soil fastest, which timing produced the highest overlap between harvest and planting. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1519, chinampas covered nearly 9,000 hectares. The system had been running continuously for over 3 centuries. It was, and this is not exaggeration, the most productive per square foot agricultural system the pre-industrial world ever documented. Then it was dismantled. The Spanish drained the lakes, the canals collapsed. The knowledge didn't disappear. It just stopped being funded. And the people who had perfected the art of continuous harvest from small managed plots were replaced by people who believed farming meant 1 crop, 1 season, 1 gamble. That belief eventually crossed an ocean and became American agricultural policy. Let's slow down here. The average American corn farmer generates somewhere between $400 and $600 per acre in revenue. That's the system we built our entire agricultural infrastructure around. $600 per acre, per year. Jean-Martin Fortier, a Canadian market gardener who has been farming since 2004 on just 1.5 acres in Quebec, generates roughly $100,000 per acre, not from subsidies, not from commodity trading, from vegetables, sold direct, grown in succession on standardized 30-inch beds, each 100 feet long. Feeds over 200 families through a CSA and market stand, and does it without a tractor. His method? Succession planting. The same principle the Aztecs used. When one crop comes out, the next goes in. No bed sits empty. No month passes without a harvest. Another grower using the same framework, Eric Schultz of Steadfast Farm in Arizona, reports gross revenues closer to $200,000 per acre. These are documented numbers, published, verifiable, and almost never mentioned in the context of American agricultural education, which still teaches farming as if the only options are industrial scale or hobby gardening. The entry cost to start a 6-bed cash crop loop? Depending on your soil and existing tools, somewhere between $300 and $800. Seed, compost, a few hand tools, and something to write on. That's it. The cash crop loop runs on 3 decisions. Get any one of them wrong, and the system underperforms. Get all 3 right, and the math starts compounding in ways that are difficult to ignore. Most people who try succession planting fail because they think in crops instead of beds. They plant radishes, harvest them, stare at the empty dirt for 2 weeks, and then wonder what to put there next. The loop works in reverse. You start with the calendar, not the seed packet. Each bed gets assigned a 12-month schedule before a single seed touches soil. March through mid-April, radishes, which reach harvest in 21 to 30 days, depending on variety. Mid-April through May, leaf lettuce, which matures in 40 to 50 days for loose leaf or 60 for full heads. June through August, bush beans, 50 to 60 days. September, a cover crop or fast brassica. October, garlic cloves go in the ground, where they'll overwinter and harvest the following July. That's 1 bed. 4 crop cycles, 12 months of planned use. Now multiply by 6. The critical principle. The 140A built his entire operation around is overlap. While bed 1 is in its lettuce phase, bed 2 is finishing radishes, bed 3 has beans climbing, and bed 4's garlic is already underground. You're never waiting for one thing to end before the next begins. Something is always 3 days from harvest. Something else is always 2 weeks from planting. 40A's farm runs 10 plots of 16 beds each, and every bed is accounted for, every week, all year. You don't need that scale. You need 6 beds and a calendar. Here is where most backyard farming guides stop, and here is where the money actually stabilizes. Outdoor beds are seasonal. Even with aggressive succession, most of the continental United States has 3 to 5 months where nothing grows outside without serious infrastructure. If your income depends on a monthly harvest, you cannot afford a 3-month gap. Microgreens fill that gap. One standard 10 by 20 tray of microgreens costs between $1 and $3 to produce. Seed, soil, water, a shelf, a light. That tray sells for $20 to $40 at a farmer's market or direct to a restaurant. The cycle from planting to harvest is 7 to 14 days, not months, days. Radish microgreens can be cut in a week. Sunflower and pea shoots in 10 to 14 days. A small rack in a basement or spare room, 150 to 300 square feet, can generate $2,000 to $6,000 per month once you have buyers lined up. The production cost to revenue ratio on microgreens is frankly unreasonable. Gross margins above 85% are normal. The bottleneck is never the growing. It's building recurring customer relationships, restaurant standing orders, CSA add-ons, weekly market presence, before you scale production. And mushrooms. Specifically oyster mushrooms, which incubate in about 15 days, fruit and flushes 10 to 14 days apart, and retail at $12 to $16 per pound. A 5.5 pound block yields about a pound on first flush, another half pound on second. 50 blocks cycling through a small fruiting chamber can generate meaningful monthly revenue. And unlike outdoor crops, they don't care what month it is. Together, microgreens and mushrooms transform the loop from a seasonal system into a year-round one. I'll just remember what goes where is the sentence that kills more succession systems than any pest or drought. You need a spreadsheet. 1 row per bed, 12 columns for 12 months. In each cell, crop name, planting date, expected harvest date. That's the entire system. Fortier standardized his beds to identical dimensions, specifically so that crop rotation and production planning could be calculated in advance, not improvised in the field. Plan the full year before you plant week 1. Adjust as you learn. Some varieties will outperform your estimates, some will underperform, some will sell faster than you expected and need more bed space next quarter. But start with the map, not the seeds. Here is the actual sequence. Week 1. You build or prep 6 beds. If you're starting from lawn, strip the sod, lay 4 inches of quality compost, and let it settle for a week. 30-inch beds as long as your space allows. Fortier uses 100 feet, but 20 to 40 feet works for a starter operation. Paths between beds just wide enough to kneel in. Week 2. Beds 1 and 2 get radish seed. Direct sow. 15 seeds per square foot. Water daily. Expect sprouts inside 72 hours. Week 3. Beds 3 and 4 get lettuce transplants. Starts you grew indoors 2 weeks earlier or purchased from a nursery. Leaf lettuce, not head. Faster to harvest, easier to sell, more forgiving in heat. Week 4. Set up your indoor station. A single wire rack, a humidity dome, a grow light, 6 trays. Your first microgreen planting goes in now. Radish and sunflower to start. Fastest turnaround, easiest to sell, most forgiving for beginners. By day 25, you're pulling radishes from beds 1 and 2. Take them to market that week or deliver to a restaurant. Immediately replant those beds with the next crop in your rotation. Beds 5 and 6 get beans in late May. Bush varieties that don't need trellising. 50 to 60 days. By midsummer, those beds are producing. Late September, clear the spent bean beds. In October, plant garlic cloves. They go dormant through winter, emerge in spring, and harvest the following July. While they're underground and silent, your microgreens and mushrooms are covering every month in between. The first time you harvest from 3 different systems in the same week. Outdoor beds, microgreen trays, and a mushroom flush. Something changes. Not dramatic. Just clear. You see the loop. You feel the rhythm of it, and you realize you've built a system that doesn't depend on any single crop, any single season, or any single buyer saying yes. 3 scales, 3 different commitments, 3 different revenue ceilings. At the starter level, 6 beds, a small indoor microgreen setup, no mushrooms yet. Documented operations running similar configurations report gross revenues of $600 to $1,800 per month during active growing season, with microgreens carrying the winter months. Annual gross in the range of $8,000 to $15,000. You're doing this alone, in your backyard, with hand tools. At the serious level, 12 to 20 beds, a dedicated indoor space for microgreens, and a small mushroom fruiting chamber. The numbers shift. Well-managed small-scale operations report monthly revenues of $2,000 to $4,000, with documented annual grosses of $25,000 to $50,000. You might have part-time help during harvest weeks. You have regular market customers and at least 2 restaurant accounts. At full operation, using Fortier's model as the documented benchmark, intensive succession planting on 1 to 2 acres with year-round indoor production, direct sales through CSA, farmers market, and restaurant channels, you're looking at the numbers his students and imitators report. 6 figures in gross revenue from less land than most people's suburban lots. 3 sales channels matter. Farmers markets are highest volume. You move the most product in a single morning. Direct restaurant accounts are highest margin. Chefs pay premium for fresh, local, and consistent. CSA subscriptions are most predictable. Monthly income locked in before the season starts, cash flow you can plan around, use all 3. Depending on 1 is fragile. Depending on 3 is a business. Most guides stop before this part. 3 things nobody enjoys talking about, and all 3 are true. First, the labor. Succession planting is not set it and forget it farming. Every 2 to 3 weeks, something needs planting, something needs harvesting, something needs bed. Prep. Microgreens need daily attention. Watering, checking for mold, harvesting at the right moment. Mushroom blocks need monitoring for humidity, temperature, CO2 levels. At starter scale, expect 8 to 12 hours per week of actual work. At serious scale, 20 to 30. This is not passive income. It's active, physical, repetitive work that compounds over time into skill. But the first 6 months feel like you're learning a new language by being dropped in the country. Second, the market-building reality. You will not sell everything you grow in month 1 or month 2. Building a customer base, the restaurant chef who trusts your consistency, the farmers market regulars who look for your table, the CSA members who commit for a season, takes 2 to 3 growing seasons of showing up every week with quality product, even when you're underselling or giving away samples. The loop produces, but production without a buyer is compost. Third, gross versus net. Every number in this script is gross revenue. Seed costs, soil amendments, water, electricity for grow lights, market booth fees, packaging, gas to deliver. Those come out before you calculate what actually hits your pocket. At small scale, expect 30 to 50% of gross to go back into the operation. The honest numbers are still good, but they're not the headline numbers. Go in knowing the difference. 3 structural advantages that don't show up in most farming spreadsheets. Recession behavior. When the economy contracts, demand for cheap, fresh, local food doesn't decline. It increases. People who lose access to expensive restaurant meals start cooking. People who feel economic anxiety start wanting to know where their food comes from. Small-scale local producers historically see increased demand during downturns, not decreased. Inflation resistance. Your primary inputs are seed, compost, and water. Seed prices rise slowly. Compost can be generated on-site. Water costs vary by region but represent a fraction of total expense. Meanwhile, the retail price of fresh produce at farmers' markets rises with inflation. Protecting your margin? You're not buying synthetic fertilizer at petrochemical prices. You're not financing a combine. Your cost structure is fundamentally different from the system that collapses when input prices spike. Compounding soil biology. Every cycle of succession planting, every application of compost, every crop rotation that alternates root depth and nitrogen demand, it builds the soil. Year 1 yields are your worst yields. By year 3, the same beds produce more, with less amendment, because the microbial ecosystem you've been feeding is now feeding you back. This is the advantage that never appears on a first-year balance sheet and dominates the 5-year one. The Aztecs understood something that American agriculture spent 50 years trying to forget. In 1971, Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz told American farmers to get big or get out. He dismantled supply management programs, pushed monoculture from fence row to fence row, and built a system designed to produce cheap corn at volume, not to keep small farmers solvent. By 1980, more than 1.7 million farms had disappeared. The math favored machinery over hands, acreage over intensity, and volume over diversity. Between 2012 and 2017 alone, another 67,000 farms closed. Today, just over 5% of American farms account for 75% of all sales. That policy didn't prove that small farming doesn't work. It proved that small farming wasn't funded. The Chinampa operators of Tenochtitlan ran continuous harvest systems on plots narrower than a parking space and fed a city of 200,000 people for 300 years. Their per-square-foot productivity has arguably never been matched at scale. They didn't need policy support. They needed water, soil biology, and a calendar. Not a conspiracy, just the ordinary math of institutional funding pointing in a direction that had nothing to do with feeding communities and everything to do with feeding commodity markets. The knowledge didn't disappear. It just stopped being taught. 10 years from now, picture this. Your neighbor, decent person, works hard, 2 incomes, is standing in a grocery store in January holding a plastic clamshell of lettuce that was harvested 11 days ago in Arizona, trucked across the country in a refrigerated trailer and priced at $4.99. The lettuce is already wilting at the edges. The nutrition has been declining since the moment it was cut, and the system that delivered it to that shelf is so fragile that a single diesel price spike or a single supply chain disruption can empty that shelf for weeks. You're standing in your basement. The grow lights are humming, 60 trays of microgreens. Sunflower, radish, pea shoot are at various stages. Some were planted yesterday, some are getting cut today. Weighed, packed into containers, and loaded into your vehicle for a Tuesday restaurant delivery that's been standing for 3 years now. The mushroom chamber next to the rack has a flush of blue oyster coming in. Fat clusters pushing through the slits in the bags, the specific damp earth smell that means they'll be ready by Thursday. Outside, the beds are frozen. Garlic cloves sit beneath the mulch, doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Nothing visible, everything underground, roots slowly building through cold soil that would kill any other crop you planted. Your neighbor worries about the grocery bill in February. You check your harvest calendar. 6 beds, 2 indoor systems, 12 months of planned production, nothing fancy. Nothing that requires an engineering degree or a $50,000 loan. Just a loop, crop following crop, bed following bed, season following season, running the way farming ran for centuries before someone decided. It wasn't efficient enough for an empire. Not the loud kind of freedom, not the kind they make documentaries about. The quiet kind. The kind where you walk past your beds in the dark on a January morning and know, not hope, know, that the next harvest is already growing. The question isn't whether this works. The question is whether you start this season or next. Map out 6 beds on a calendar. Give each bed a crop for each month. Build your indoor station before you need it, not after the outdoor season ends and you're scrambling. Find one restaurant, one market, one neighbor who'll buy what you grow. Start the loop. If this changed the way you think about your land, share it with someone who's sitting on soil they haven't used yet. Subscribe. The next system is coming.